Let's get it going. I'm so juiced right now. Yo, first debate. We got who's the better power forward between Charles Barkley and Karl Malone? Swipa, if I'm not mistaken, you got Barkley.
Yes, sir.
Right? Okay, make sure I'm on time. We're not even going to waste no time on the coin flip because I don't even go off the coin toss anyway. I'm just messing around with quarters. I'm wasting change. Yo, Gifted, you want to go first or second?
I'll go first.
Go first? Let's get it then, Gifted. When you start, JD will start the time. Let's go, baby.
Yeah, so on the court, Karl Malone is the better basketball player, and the primary reason behind that is in the moment where he was dominating his era, he was looked at to be the best power forward at the time. Charles Barkley was behind him. And more importantly, what he was able to do in terms of longevity, the amount of prime seasons he has. He had 17 seasons in his NBA career, played 18 total, where he played 80 games. His amount of durability through those regular seasons to dominate consistently is a big part of why he's there. He's the only player not named Michael Jordan to average 31 points in the 90s, and a lot of that is because he was a super athletic freak where he could be one of the best pick and roll finishers ever. And then at the same time, as he progressed, he found different ways to play, developing his block work and his skills and becoming a better player in that area. And he was on many high-win teams for that Utah Jazz crew who made it to the finals twice. He won 2 MVPs, and he has multiple seasons where he was all NBA and he was all defense 4 different times. Arguably, I think that Karl Malone at his best with John Stockton back there was a phenomenal 2-man pairing. But for John Stockton to get all of those assists, Karl Malone was a big part of that. There's a reason why Karl Malone is still top 5 in scoring today. That's how dominant he was as a player. And he's a better player than Charles Barkley, who, even though he was a good player, had some flaws.
Okay. Gifted left a couple seconds on the clock for you, Swiper. You got it, bro. When you start, the time will start too. Let's get it.
Yeah, I appreciate this conversation. I think that when you're having the conversation about Karl Malone versus Charles Barkley, what you're really doing, you're having a conversation about peak expectations given the roster, the floor raising capability, and also the level of competition that they play. So if you remember, Charles Barkley, when he walked into the league, by year 2 was a top 6 MVP candidate. From year 2 to year 9, Charles Barkley was 6'6", 4'6", 2, 4, 12, and 1 in the MVP race at the end of the season. Literally by year 6, he was already walking into a superstar. By the way, Charles Barkley was 9 straight years of 24 points per game and 10 rebounds a game and 4.5 assists per game. In the playoffs, he's legitimately one of the best playoff players of the 1990s and of his era. And during an 8-year stretch in the playoffs, he averaged 24.8, 12.1, and 4.1 assists per game on 1.7 steals and a block, and he shot 61% from 2. And I think a lot of people, when you think about Charles Barkley, because he's on television, people get this idea that he wasn't the dominant rebounder and scorer. Literally, of that era, there were people that were saying that he was right behind Hakeem Olajuwon and Michael Jordan as the 3rd best player from the 1990 all the way to about 1995. Literally anything you asked him to do, he was able to do. He was even a positive defender, especially early on in his career. And he did this without ever having another true all-pro, all-NBA player next to him. So Charles broke everything, and he did everything at a super high level.
Yeah.
Right. Let's go. Let's go. Gifted.
Yeah. So when it comes down to choosing who the better players, at the end of the day, both of these players were not able to win championships as the number 1 option. So what I look at next is, well, how long were your best years? How dominant were you in those years? And once again, when it comes down to Karl Malone, not only did he play 18 seasons in the NBA, but again, he finished top 4 in MVP 6 times. 6 different seasons, he was top 4 in MVP. And for his career, he averaged 25 and 10. And during his most dominant runs, he could average 29 or 27. And again, he found different ways to play. The reason why he's better than Charles Barkley is, sure, if you want to say Charles Barkley is an offensive player, I can understand that. But defensively, Charles Barkley had many different moments where he was a lazy overall defender. He was a liability that teams could pick on. And more importantly, his shot diet offensively cost his team a lot of times. People called him the Shaquille O'Neal of three-point shooting because he loved taking threes, despite the fact that he was never a good three-point shooter on volume. When it comes down to Karl Malone, he's a player that can fit into different styles based off how fast he gets up and down the floor, based off how he virtually never got hurt, and how physical and athletic that he was. There's a reason why he's top 5 in scoring, and there's a reason why he was able to play that many years in the NBA at a sustained excellence and high level. The only guy to basically get 2 MVPs at the same time where Michael Jordan was absolutely dominating his era, not name a king. That's how good Karl Malone was.
Go ahead, Swipa. I'm not going to slow you down. You got it. Let's go.
Yeah, I think when you're talking MVPs and peak, I don't really think this is a conversation, namely because the year that Charles Barkley was able to go to the NBA Finals, he went and faced versus the Michael Jordan team, and during that final series, he averaged 27, 13, and 6. And despite the fact that you said he was an inefficient shooter, he shot 48% from the field in that finals. In game 1, 21, 11, and 5. Game 2 versus Michael Jordan in the NBA Finals, 42 points, 13 rebounds, 4 assists with a block and with a steal. And then in game 3, 24, 19, 4. And then he had a triple-double in game 4 with 32, 12, and 10. And so here's the thing. Charles Barkley literally was going band for band with the best player in the world and the best player of all time by this point for many people. And so I think a lot of this misnomer about him is that he didn't show up when it mattered most. And defensively, he actually wasn't a bad defender until he got older. When he was young, because he was so athletic, because he was so explosive, and a part of it was his defensive rebounding. Can we make the same argument now for a lot of players? Charles Barkley was the single most dominant rebounder of his era. And on top of that, he was one of the best post scorers since the 1980s. He literally could score over anyone, anywhere, at any point in time. And had Charles Barkley had more consistent help during that NBA final, then he would have been the one to take down Michael Jordan. And we don't make that same argument for Karl Malone and for John Stockton. And he never played with a player as good as John Stockton in his prime either. So to me, it's not a conversation.
Let's go.
Yeah.
You got it?
Yes. So for me, it's not a conversation. I agree with Swiper there. It's Karl Malone. The reason why is he brought up one key word: consistency. The biggest thing that's known about Charles Barkley is, as explosive as he was, his consistency came into question. Swiper mentioned the fact that he shot 48%. Again, that's cool. But I specifically pointed out three-point shooting, where he had a season where he was top 25 in three-point attempts, and he was not a good shooter. At the end of the day, Karl Malone can play different styles. He hustles way better than him. And more importantly, in terms of consistency, he had, again, 17 seasons of 80 games, multiple 25-point per game seasons with Stockton. A lot of people give Stockton credit, and rightfully so. He was a good overall decision maker. But Karl Malone is like that because of how he was able to finish and how he built his skills every single season. And at the later end of his years, he was able to play a different style where he could become a very good post passer as well. Charles Barkley did not have extended excellence. We're talking about greatness. You are speaking to how many seasons were you able to do it? And the only other team outside of the Rockets who didn't have to play Michael Jordan in the NBA Finals, that made it to the finals twice to challenge them, was that Utah Jazz team. Charles Barkley defense is not portable enough to justify giving him all of that usage in a vacuum. Karl Malone, at the very least, based on what he can do on both ends of the floor, especially matching scoring production, despite the fact that Charles might be more skilled, is why he's the better player.
Hey, Swiper, whenever you're ready, bro, bring it on home.
So, Charles, at that point in time, and especially if we're having, again, that's why it has to be about peak and overall floor racing. Charles never played next to a player as good as John Stockton. He never had a distributor. And again, John Stockton, even at that point in time, was marked as a good defender for a lot of people. Again, relative to the era, we get that. But for Charles Barkley, again, he was able to do this carrying a Phoenix Suns team. They had another all-star on the roster, but he was mostly known as a shooter. And again, Kevin Johnson and them being on the roster, he was able to take that team to 62 wins. And even when you're having all-time debates, that MVP that Charles Barkley won, he won it when Michael Jordan was at his apex, when Hakeem Olajuwon was at his apex. They finished number 2 and number 3 this season. That he won that MVP award. And again, by the time he went to the NBA playoffs, you talked about longevity. Again, I brought it up earlier. 9 straight years for Charles Barkley when he got to the playoffs with 24 and 10 with nearly 4 assists per game on good efficiency. And again, he played versus the very best of the best. whether it was David Robinson, whether it was Michael Jordan, whether it was Hakeem, it really didn't matter. Charles was able to elevate his performance in the playoffs when it mattered consistently. And again, this isn't a 5, 6, or 7-year stretch. This is a 9-year stretch when this was happening. And he did this when Jordan and others were still at their apex, and including battling the Spurs in that early 90s. And again, he also took down the Seattle Supersonics when they had Sean Kemp, and he was taking his team to where they were going. So across the board, Charles Barkley was just a better player.
Damn it. Oh, I want another round. I want to go 4 rounds. We need 4 rounds of this one. Unfortunately, I can't lose my gig. So, JD, drop that poll. Let's get straight to it. Fellas, that was a hell of a debate, y'all. Hell of a debate. The next debate is going to be about who had the most the best underdog story, the best Cinderella ring. Swipe, I believe you got the 2011 Mavericks, and Gifted, you have the 1994 Houston Rockets. Is that correct?
Yep, 94, 95. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, the question is, yes, sir. So this two-parter said greatest underdog story, and then it also said which was the greatest championship run. That's the distinction, right?
Right. Yes, that's what I got here as well.
I got you. Okay, make sure.
In Swiper, I have you going first this round. Gifted went first the next round. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump straight in. I don't want to stop this momentum. This is a hell of a debate. I told y'all this is one of the most anticipated debates that we have in the whole PCL. You know what I mean? The only time we're going to get a better debate is when one of these two kind of gets smoked by me. But in the meantime, Swiper, let's get going. When you get started, the clock will start.
Yeah, so when we're talking underdog story, this isn't much of a conversation for me. And the reason is that because when Hakeem Olajuwon came out of the draft, he was the consensus, not a question, consensus #1 overall pick in that draft. Now, he ended up vindicating that by being the best player of his era outside of Michael Jordan. And again, he won MVPs, he won championships, he did everything he was supposed to do. But when he came out of Houston, there was no conversation, no question. But with Dirk slid to the 9th overall pick, and the Dallas Mavericks traded out a 6 in order to get Dirk. And then when they did it because they saw him play in a tournament. And in that Nike Hoop Summit, they saw this man do things they hadn't seen from a big. They wanted him to be the 3rd star with Michael Finley and with Steve Nash. They traded out of that 6th pick, got cash exceptions back, got him at 9, and then the rest was history. But again, he didn't have the carpet laid out for him at that point, and he didn't even have the carpet laid out for him early on in his career. He had to work to get to a situation where people thought he was a bona fide superstar and accepted him for who he was. So if you're asking who's the better underdog story and who had to overcome more adversity or who had to do more to prove themselves, well, it was Dirk. Because remember, in 1998, international players that did not play here in America, they were not getting the due that they deserved. And a lot of this is because there had been some misses up to this point leading into the NBA draft. And so when Dirk came around, he slid to 9 because people didn't believe that kind of big would translate. And then he set the record straight by being one of the best players of all time.
Let's go ahead, Gifted. I'm not going to slow you down.
How many third teams in NBA history have won NBA championships? 8. Dallas was a 3rd seed. How many seeds in NBA history at 6 have gone on to win the title? 1. And that's the 94-95 Rockets. That Rockets team is the team that fresh off of the title had title aspirations. But as people know, when you win one championship, that's phenomenal. But there's levels to greatness. There's tiers to greatness, right? To prove your stamp, to prove that you're really, really good, a lot of teams have to win again or go back to back. And there's not that many teams that have gone back to back in NBA history. The 94-95 Rockets was after having a hectic regular season where they traded for Drexler. They had guys in and out of the lineup. Hakeem was injured, and they went into the playoffs as a 6 seed. As we all know, Hakeem Olajuwon is a top 10 player of all time. A lot of that is because of his play within these 2 years. And specifically for this year for the Houston Rockets, they were tested and faced way more adversity as an overall than what the Dallas Mavericks had to do round by round by round by round. What Hakeem had to do on both ends, not just offensively, because Hakeem also had his work cut out for him as a player, transitioning from soccer to basketball, developing his skill sets on both ends of the ball for 2 years to cement a back-to-back title run that cemented his legacy as a top 10 player is why that's a bigger underdog run to me as a collective than what the Dallas Mavericks had to do.
Great first round. Great first round. I'm not going to stop this momentum. Come on, Swiper. Bring it on, brother.
Yeah, I mean, if we're just talking about individual seasons, which is more impressive, more significant, it's the 2011 Dallas Mavericks. Again, Dirk in that NBA playoffs averaged 27.7 points per game, 8.1 rebounds, 2.5 assists, and he shot 49% from two, 46% from three. And y'all, everybody knows he's a great mid-range shooter, but did you know over that run, Dirk shot 1/3 of his shots from mid-range? He shot 47% as a mid-range shooter from 10 to 16 feet over that run. In that run, they beat Portland 4-2. He averaged 27, 8, and 3 on 45, 44, 89. He then swept the defending champion Kobe Bryant, Pau Gasol, Los Angeles Lakers, with averaging 25, 9, and 3 on 57, 73, 94. He then faced versus Russell Westbrook, Kevin Durant, James Harden, averaged 32, 6, and 3 on 56, 36, 97, 4-2. And then versus LeBron James. Everybody said they were going to be the champion. Everybody said going into the season, this is the dynasty. They were going to be the team to rewrite the record book. We're going to see a 3-time champion like we hadn't seen since the Los Angeles Lakers, and Dirk put them down. In that series, 26, 10, and 2, 42, 37, 97, and put it to rest. Bouncing back after getting out the first round in 2007, and he does it in 2011 with one of the most incredible runs of all time, one of the best scoring runs you've ever seen, and does it versus the best level of competition you've ever seen. No question.
Let's go, Gifted. Let's go.
The best level of competition was clearly the Rockets. And the reason why is, notice, Swipa led with the Trailblazers. How about a 60-win Jazz team where in the first round back then, it was only a 5-game series. They had to go out to Utah and win game 5 on the road against, again, a 60-win Jazz team. They won game 5 on the road. Then after that, they move on. Again, the Mavericks, in terms of the collective, their adversity is not the same when they then move on to a Suns team, right? And this goes back to Swipa just saying Charles Barkley was a better player than Karl Malone. They go down 3-1. At that time, it was only 3 other teams in NBA history who came back from down 3-1. They said that this team didn't have it together. They didn't have enough. Hakeem wasn't there. They come back 3-1 against the Suns when it wasn't popular to do that. They came back and won. Then they go to the finals against a David Robinson-led Spurs, who was the best team in the Western Conference. Again, a very high win team, 60 wins. And at the same time, the Suns were a 59-win team. They then beat them. Hakeem is giving David Robinson the work. They cannot guard him. He literally averages 35, 12, and 5 with 4 blocks a game. Then he gets to the finals where people think the Magic might be young, but the fact that they were able to beat Michael Jordan in that same run, they take them seriously and they sweep them after going down 20-something plus in game 1. They win that game. They dominate them the rest of the way, where Hakeem averages 32.3 points per 75, 10 with a plus 8.9 playoff offense. That's what he was leading. And on both ends defensively, he was the best defender in the world.
Sorry, I had to mute you, Gifted. Great points. Hey, we got one more round of this topic. It's a fire topic. This is a fire debate. This is getting heated. Yo, whoever told you that these brothers be yapping told you wrong. This is straight hoop talk. Real debates. Let's go, Swiper.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate the enthusiasm in your argument, and I think you make some valid points. But again, if you're comparing it to 2011, a part of 2011 is the context behind the season. Going into that year, despite the regular season success, everyone was down on Dirk and the Dallas Mavericks. Nobody thought they had a legitimate chance. Once they got past Portland and said, cool, the real playoffs are going to start. And again, it's not like Kobe and Powell and them went into the series not being the favorite. They were the prohibited favorite. Everybody believed at this point that either Kobe or LeBron was the best player in the world. And so going into the series, they had to be willing to put together a masterclass in order to win the vote of approval from the public, because it couldn't be tight. They made it to where it wasn't a question. Again, back to back. They were already champions, back-to-back champions. They step onto the court with the Dallas Mavericks, and they literally get swept. Do not win a game. So over the course of this run, some of the best players that we have ever seen in our lives, the best players were some of the best peaks in Kobe and Durant and Westbrook, and then LeBron James. Dwayne Wade was still Dwayne Wade in this run, and they had Chris Bosh. He took all of them down. The Mavericks took all of them down. Tyson Chandler gets acquired to that team, defensive player of the year level performance. Jason Kidd comes over there, leans on the three-point shot and the playmaking. They got a bunch of players knowing exactly what they're supposed to do, and they literally walk through the Western Conference, and then they walk through LeBron James in the Eastern Conference so bad where people are still bringing that up 13 years later. It's better than anything he got.
Bring it home, Gifted.
Okay, so notice how he said walk through the Western Conference. I can't say the same because they actually faced tougher competition in the Western Conference than what Dallas did to make it to the finals. Again, a 60-win team in the first round. As a 6 seed, you do not have home court advantage. You're playing nothing but home court teams that are better than you. And then above all else, we're talking about adversity during the run. Again, beating a 60-win team where you have to win the closeout game on the road is adversity. Going down 3-1 against the Phoenix Suns, who won 59 games that year, is going through adversity. Only truly great players can overcome that type of adversity. Then going to face the Spurs, where they had the MVP of the season, the MVP over Hakeem, because Hakeem had some injury stuff going on, and he was cooking him. David Robinson, a guy who looked to be one of the best winners of all time, was getting torched and destroyed by Hakeem. Hakeem was floor raised in such an insane roster. And then when they get to the finals, people favored the Magic. They were not favored in any series. Why? Because they were the 6th seed. And once again, we're talking about pressure, right? When you win a NBA championship, there is no bigger pressure because every team puts a target on your back. That's why few teams go back to back, and that's why they face more adversity. And speaking about the Miami Heat at the very end, again, credits to Dallas for doing what they had to do. But a lot of people, even to this day, agree that LeBron James did not play at his level at all. And if he was even baseline, that series might look slightly different. For this Rockets team, at every point they were counted out.
Drop the poll, JD. Drop the poll. Drop the poll. Drop the poll, JD. This third round will be for all the chips. This will be for all the chips. And the topic for this third round, I have right here in front of me. It's the Bad Boys Pistons versus the 2004 Pistons. We're talking about who's the best defensive team, correct, fellas?
Yes.
And Swipa, you have the Bad Boys. Gifted, you have 04?
Yes.
Okay. Gifted is getting ready to kick it off right now. Gifted, you from Detroit, ain't you?
Yes, sir.
Don't let your city down, brother. Don't let your city down right here with this topic. Let's go. When you start, the time will start. Let's go.
The topic is defense. Defense. Who is the better defensive team? Not better team. Who is the better defensive team? The answer is clearly the 2004 Pistons, and it's really not a conversation. Respect to the Bad Boy Pistons who played in a different era. Their type of defense was where they were more physical in spots. They had the Jordan rules going on. But in terms of defense, it was the 2004 Pistons. Whenever we see a great defensive team, the 2022 Boston Celtics, even the Timberwolves in this playoffs, we always ask, were they better than the 2004 Pistons on defense? But it's never, were they better than the Bad Boy Pistons? That starting five of Billups, Hamilton, Prince, Wallace, all of them together with Prince came together and really dominated their aspects specifically. They allowed the least amount of points per game in the playoffs of any length. 5-game series, 4-game series, whatever you want to call it, they have the lowest amounts of points per game. They were not scoring on that Pistons defense. And more importantly, they did not have a superstar. They didn't have a top 10 player like Isaiah Thomas in that lineup to build them out of offense. They had to play together like a string on offense, but their heart and their identity was on the defensive end. And that's why they were able to pull off one of the biggest upsets we've ever seen at the biggest stage. They have the lowest defensive rating in playoff history. That's how dominant of a team this defense is. And even now in 2024, you're hearing talks about their defense. Whenever defense comes up, more than the Bad Boy Pistons. The answer is clearly the 2004 Pistons for being the better defense.
Fight back, Swiper. Let's go.
Yeah, I mean, which year are we talking about first? I mean, I guess I'll start with 88, 89. So, again, people got to remember, like, at this point in time, you know, he brought up Isaiah Thomas in the offense, but the team was stacked. Dennis Rodman, Bill Laimbeer, Joe Dumars, Isaiah Thomas, Mark Aguirre, Vinnie Johnson, John Sally, Scott Hastings. They were loaded with defenders. And at that point in time, when they won the NBA Finals that year, like, again, I don't want to rewrite history and what exactly happened because it wasn't their offense that got it done. That year, Dennis Rodman finished third in the DPOY race, but that year in the playoff, they took down Boston 3-0. They took down the Bucks 4-0. They took down the Bulls 4-2. That season, y'all, Michael Jordan finished second in the MVP race for the Bulls. They held them to a 103.1 offensive rating with Michael Jordan on the Bulls and held him to 46% from the field. And then, by the way, they go to the NBA Finals. And what happens in the NBA Finals? They play versus Magic Johnson, the same Magic that won the MVP that year, one of the most dominant offensive seasons of Magic's career. And they beat them in not 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 straight games. It was a sweep, and it was their defense. That team had Magic, Kareem, and James Worthy, and Michael Cooper, and they got swept. So if you're asking who the better defense was to name the competition, the fact of the matter is they saw Jordan, they saw the Celtics, and they saw Magic and took them down and held everybody below expectation, and they didn't have to worry about playing somebody hurt on the other end because they were all at their age.
So I find this funny because, again, I want to be clear about this. The lowest defensive rating in playoff history. The 2004 Pistons defense allowed under 40% field goal percentage for entire NBA teams in 12 playoff games. After they made the Rasheed trade, they literally allowed under 79.7 points per game for the rest of the season, including playoffs, right? He wants to bring up competition. Shaquille O'Neal, as a dominant big man who in the finals during his three-peats averaged at minimum 33. Guess what he averaged against the Detroit Pistons? 26. Was he efficient from the floor? Sure. But in terms of making him work for that 26, they made them work. They played him single coverage. They were trapping Kobe, and they made it a problem. And guess what else people don't really remember? They might have swept the Lakers if Kobe does not hit a big jumper to send it to OT in game 2. They might have swept them. So they didn't just beat this team. They were dominating this team. Okay, they were dominating them. When you think about a team like that, again, imagine allowing under 90 points in 18 playoff games. That is how dominant this team was. And again, they just played a balanced enough offense to get by, but by no means did they have a superstar that was, a ball hogging and really floor carrying the entire load. This was a team effort. And again, it's not about who's the better team. It's about who had the better defense. They do not have those numbers. Swipa bragged about being under 101 points per game. How about 90.2? What's your answer for that?
Let's go, Swipa. I'm not going to stop this momentum. This is a hell of a debate. Let's go.
Yeah, and again, I think, if you're asking relative to the era and who they played, I think that bad boy Pistons team, their hallmark, the calling card for that team was their defense. And again, I know a lot of people bring up physicality and they bring up the Jordan rules. And for them, people talk about that basketball like it's antiquated because for them, it's the physicality, it's people coming into the paint, it's the dominance. It's the fact that when you were jumping into the air, there's this whole thing about okay, if Jordan jumped, I'm going to foul him, we're going to bring him to the ground. But it wasn't just that. It was just the level of engagement they had on a play-by-play basis. And so even just beyond the basic numbers, teams were afraid to play versus that defense because of how big, how strong, and how physical they were. And so again, they went to 3 straight finals. Now, they only won 2 of those finals, and then granted, Magic was hurt. He was not himself in that last one. But if you just read up to what happened, or at least in the 89 final, when you read up to what happened with them, they were able to take apart offenses consistently, and didn't matter who it was. Again, it didn't matter if it was the Celtics, didn't matter if it was the Bucks, didn't matter if it was anybody. They were able to take these teams down. And even for Michael Jordan, until they got to the point where they can ask Scottie Pippen and they can fully integrate what they were doing with Phil Jackson, they weren't able to beat this team. There was just a level of engagement that they were able to play with consistently. Even Isaiah Thomas, as small as he was never like an elite level defender, but he was more than passable. And so you put them on the team. And again, Bill Laimbeer, by the way, and Dennis Rodman were 2 of the best rebounders in the league. And Dennis Rodman won a DPOY over the stretch as well. They had anything and everything you needed to be a great defensive team.
Ooh, fellas. Last round of this topic. Great topic, man. Let's do it for Detroit. Do it for the D. Let's go, Gifted.
When we speak about the 04 Pistons, they're looked at to be an anomaly team because when they made it to the finals, despite people knowing about Shaq and Kobe not being on the same page, they still picked them because there's no way this Pistons team can beat them. They don't have a guy averaging 18. They didn't have some crazy all-NBA player, and yet they were able to hold the Lakers to 68 points in a playoff game. They're one of 2 teams to allow under 60 points in a playoff game. And again, I've keep asking Swipa to show me the stats in terms of defensive rating where they perform better than them. Tell me if they could run the same system the Pistons did to stop Shaq, where they can play him single coverage. Ben Wallace is one of the most special defensive players ever because of what he was able to do, and specifically how he was able to play Shaq straight up while they trapped Kobe. That's what they were able to do. And again, defense was their calling card. They didn't have some star offensive player, so they had to dial in and get contributions from many players. You're talking about being connected. This is a team that made a trade for Rasheed Wallace midseason, a core part of their run. They didn't have him for 2 seasons. They didn't have him for a full offseason. They had him for the rest of the regular season, and they figured out their chemistry and won. They win 7 games against the Nets. Their last coach in Carlisle, who was then pivoted to the Pacers, that was a whole thing. They beat them. Then they go to the finals and they beat the Lakers. Shaquille goes from putting up 33 points per game to 26. That 2004 defense is better. They allow the lowest defense of any team, and the Bad Boy Pistons are included in that. There's no response for that.
Let's go, Swipa. Let's go. Let's end it on a bang.
Paired.
Start over, Swipa. Let's go.
Good?
Yeah, we good.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit disingenuous to compare eras, given that we know there's a different pace being played between the two teams. And again, you're saying Shaq, I'm bringing up Michael Jordan. And so we also know this for a fact. So then sometimes you just got to like scrap the numbers. They went 8-1 versus the Lakers and then versus the Blazers in back-to-back NBA finals. 8-1. Again, that's Kareem, that's James Worthy, that's Clyde Drexler, that's Jerome Kersey, and that's Terry Porter. These were like both very good teams and very good offensive teams, and they could hardly score versus this team. Again, Bill Laimbeer and Dennis Rodman were two of the best defensive and offensive rebounders in the league. They had the size, they had the physicality, and I can't say what they would have done versus Shaq because that was 16 years later. But what I can tell you is they put Jordan in a box. What I can tell you, they put the Lakers in a box. What I can tell you, they put the Portland Trail Blazers in a box. So when they needed to show up defensively versus the team they played in their era, there was no question who the better team was. In the regular season, in one of those years, they might have finished third in defensive rating. But come playoff time, they locked everybody up. And so I think when you're having an overall defense conversation, it's always great to bring up defensive rating. But we all know that stuff is inflated by air. That stuff is inflated by pace. You could have a hot shooting night, a hot shooting team over a series, and that can mess up everything. But they held the Portland Trail Blazers below their defensive rating throughout the playoffs. In that NBA Finals, they took care of business. 2 back-to-back finals they won off of the back of their defense. So, again, Bad Boy Pistons, they take the cake every day.
Congratulations, fellas. That was a hell of a debate. I'm talking about round 1, round 2, round 3. Y'all came up and did y'all thing. Don't worry about what the head is saying, man. Y'all wasn't speaking no Japanese as far as I'm concerned. Y'all was straight hoop talk. JD, drop the poll. We got 4 weeks. Anybody that goes back and watch this, feel free to vote. Guys, thank you. Swipa, thank you. Gifted, thank you. I appreciate y'all. Hey, make sure y'all ready for next week. It's going down.